Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a modern campaign agency dedicated to using data-driven grassroots organising to build winning campaigns and make the world a better place. So whether you're in business, issue-based campaigns, or an organisation driving change in your community, Dunn Street develops strategies to overcome the challenges by connecting people that share the same values and organises them to achieve common goals from the ground up. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Hello and welcome to the final episode of Socially Democratic for 2019, which is your centre-left political and cultural podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. On this week's episode, I was joined by Harriet Shing, who is the member for the Eastern region of Victoria in the Victorian Legislative Council. And she's also a Parliamentary Secretary in a number of areas. Harriet's on the show today to talk about, well, basically we're going to wrap up 2019. We're going to look at all the things that have shaped politics both here in Victoria, across the country and internationally, and have a bit of a chin wag about that and generally just have a bit of fun. Harriet is a lot of fun. Apart from being an exceptionally talented politician, she's actually a bit of a dag as well, and it was great to have her on the show this week to put a full stop on 2019. Don't forget the podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher, so if you're an Apple Podcast user, don't forget to give us a rating and a review on your Apple Podcast app, and if you want to get any updates about the podcast, just follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram or LinkedIn. And before we go to this week's episode, just want to say thank you to each and every one of you that has supported the podcast Socially Democratic since we started way back in March or April, I think, and have helped spread the show through all your networks and liked it on social media and whatnot. We've slowly built up a great loyal fan base of listeners, and I really do appreciate your support throughout the year. And in 2020, we look forward to having a whole bunch of other guests come on and talk about very interesting topics that are of interest to people that share our centre-left, socially democratic values. So thanks very much, and I want to wish you all a very happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, good happy New Year, and whatever else you celebrate or don't celebrate. Just have a great break over the coming weeks, and I look forward to talking to you all in 2020. Until then, let's get to this week's episode. Okay, hello. We are taping this one on a Monday afternoon in downtown Melbourne, a glorious summer's afternoon. It is the 23rd of December, and they're ringing the last bell. No, my name is Stephen Donnelly, as you know, and on the show today we are joined by one of my favourite politicians and a good friend of mine, and we haven't done a podcast since my days when I worked for the Australian Labor Party, but it's great to welcome her for the first time on Socially Democratic. Harriet Shing, how are you?
Hi there, that's quite the introduction. It's a smoke-tinged afternoon here in Melbourne today too. Much of the city and indeed the state's blanketed in smoke at this time of the year. It's coming over from East Gippsland and across from South Australia and south from New South Wales. So yeah, there's a lot of not just smoke but fire around. It's been a tough start to the festive season for a lot of people, but yeah, there's a lot going on. It's lovely to join you. And
it's great to have you grace our presence and come all the way down from, you're obviously the member for Eastern Region, which is my old turf, including the great town of Warragul. How's Gippsland going these days?
Gippsland's wonderful, as it always is. It's diverse and it's resilient and it's tight-knit, and as a region, there's been an awful lot of change. We've seen the ongoing transition and development across the Latrobe Valley with the closure of Hazelwood and the demolition of that particular site. Those iconic smokestacks that people across the valley remember as being cloud machines of their youth are now being readied for demolition. There's been a lot of asbestos that's had to come out of the ground and off the site, and across the board we're seeing large-scale transition, but not altogether in a bad way. There are huge construction sites across the region too. And further east, as I said, we've got some enormous fires burning in the high country. It's going to be a very difficult Christmas for a lot of the firefighters, volunteers and their families across that part of the state. Last week, with those brutally hot conditions, we saw fires travel in a really unpredictable way that defied even the best possible modelling that our state emergency services have. So we've had to get members from brigades across the state to come in to help. They've given up their time with their families and are often completely exhausted themselves, having come from other campaign fires that are being fought. So there's a huge amount of hard work going on there. Back towards the Dandenongs and the Dandenong Ranges in the other part of the Eastern Vic region, it's quite a big patch. I do a lot of driving. There are huge things happening with the ongoing removal of level crossings, which is again a really welcome construction project that brings understandable delays, but a lot of patience from people who know it's for a really good reason, and other things that are really important to local communities as well. So a lot of kinder construction sites. I've spent a lot of time doing story time reading in kindergartens and early learning centres in recent weeks and months, and I get to the point where I almost have to be dragged off-site because I'm in the process of reenacting alpacas with maracas for the 9th time with a bunch of overly tired 3.5 to 4-year-olds, and I think it doesn't help the staff morale after a while when they have to pick their children off the ceiling one by one to get back into class activities when I've thoroughly revved them up with a series of voices and impromptu karaoke. So politics is a wide and varied profession. It's not always doom and gloom, and it's also really important to stop and to have moments of levity and hilarity along the way.
So someone mentioned to me the other day their son or daughter, it was their last day of school. Everyone talks about the kids' first day of school. It's a very emotional time for parents when they send it, particularly when it's their very first day in grade prep or reception for those South Australian listeners. And no one ever talks about the last day of school because from my own personal experience, from the age of 5 to 18, the last day of school is the best day of the year.
Discuss.
I don't think I could ever get as excited as the last day of school, even the night before.
Each year or at the end of primary and secondary only?
More so in primary, I reckon.
Right.
Maybe secondary.
Well, graduation is a big thing now in primary schools. Have you seen the way that it's become? It's like the curriculum-based equivalent of Halloween. It's something that I don't think we celebrated as much when we were finishing primary school. I know that when I finished grade 6, the trepidation about going into the big pond and being a tiny minnow was definitely there, but there wasn't a graduation ceremony as such, and now they pull out all the stops. I went to a graduation last week in Upwey South, and it was absolutely brilliant. I ended up saying to the principal that I would actually quite like to come back and graduate from grade 6 at Upwey South Primary.
Like Billy Madison.
It was just unbelievable. The parents had decked out the school hall and they did a leaving song. And then after all the awards and recognitions had been handed out and all of the kids had spoken about their peers and honoured each other and made jokes about the friendships that they'd made, they had the facade of a plane which they'd built, which every kid walks through. They get a boarding pass, which is you're now heading to the departure lounge from primary school.
That's quite clever.
And one of the teachers, who has the most magnificent name I've ever heard, Mr. Monopoly. Mr. Monopoly actually is dressed up like a captain, and he requires every grade 6 student graduating to show their boarding pass, and then he checks to make sure that it's all correct before allowing them to formally exit into the transit lounge where they have their leaving dinner, and it's kids only, followed by a disco. Is that not the most amazing event that you can think of?
Geez, that really sets the bar as well.
It's a high standard.
I'd like to see what other schools could do to match, or if not better, that.
Well, I remember when my brothers were finishing year 12, they did have a series of pranks that I think were quite ingenious, but also time lagged. So one of them involved planting carrot seeds in the cricket pitch. which didn't, in fact, bear fruit until the following season when all of a sudden they had to relay the pitch. And it's really very delayed gratification. You have to be in that for the long haul to realise the benefit. But we had the usual shaving cream and
Is this grade 6 or year 12?
No, year 12, the muck-up day equivalent.
Ours got out of hand.
Well, I think everybody's did. I think they've got some pretty tight rules on them now.
Well, ours got that out of hand. The muck-up day got banned the following year.
That's it. That's a big precedent to set. You're why people can't have nice things at the end of secondary school.
Yeah, we are. In fact, my class, all through from year 7 to year 12, just we were trailblazers of ruining everything for the classes that followed us. We were ratbags.
That's so fantastic as a badge of honour, but also think of how many people hate you because of that.
Yeah.
They would have to have had high tea with their parents, basically.
Yeah.
Because you've not allowed them to actually get amongst it.
Yep. There was broken down tractors in the middle of the oval. There was chainsaws cutting down trees. There was...
It sounds like Farm World.
It basically was. Yeah. Well, Farm World's only down the road. So
Farm World's, one of the great times of the year in the calendar.
Mars Brothers, we sort of said to the tech school, oh, you think you're tough, do you? All right, we'll show you tough.
Right.
We set some standards.
So the gauntlet was thrown.
Yeah.
Or maybe it wasn't and you just decided to go.
Oh, we burned that gauntlet.
Yeah. What gauntlet?
Yeah, it's gone.
It was Schrodinger's gauntlet. It was basically the gauntlet that didn't exist. Yeah, I think that a lot of things these days, I'm speaking to my age now, these days we're starting to see things get out of control very, very quickly thanks to the benefit of social media. Do you remember Corey Worthington, that youngster, the tyke who wore the sunglasses with yellow frames and didn't care about authority and invited as many people as wanted to come to a party, and 900 people or something like that turned up, and he had his 5 minutes of fame. And now, I mean, Corey Worthington, he's a has-been as far as what can happen with social media.
I forgot all about Corey Worthington.
No one forgets about Corey Worthington.
Yeah, he was kind of like one of those early entrepreneurs of social media. Yeah, he was a trailblazer.
And I think he tried to redeem himself. He had a series of interviews, I think, on a current affair, showing that firstly he was a bad boy, but secondly he wasn't a bad boy, and maybe there was a line of merchandise that came out. I mean, good for him on wanting to cash in on it. We've also seen in recent times Fraser Anning and Egg Boy, who is strangely reminiscent of Corey Worthington, and yet Egg Boy used his powers for good and not for evil.
Yes.
Raising an enormous amount of money, as I recall, that then went to community causes off the back of people trying to donate to his court costs. So, it's really the opportunity to shine, isn't it, when things go amok? Yeah.
I think actually part of our podcast today is going to be looking at some of the highlights of 2019. And one of the subcategories is top 5. I said international, but we can include Australia in that then. Top 5 inspirational moments of 2019. I think Egg Boy probably would fall into that, perhaps.
I think Egg Boy speaks to something that was deep in all of our DNA. I think 19 primary votes and a platform that flows from that for someone like Fraser Anning made people very, very angry in a way that perhaps hadn't been tapped into before. And there's a very big difference between shouting at the television or screaming at your radio or your Twitter screen and actually going up to a bloke and trying to egg him in front of a whole lot of cameras. And yeah, it's I think something that's made Egg Boy into really a role model for our times. And yet, interestingly, I don't know his name.
I was thinking the same thing. I was going, the more time you said Egg Boy, I'm going, surely he must have a name.
The Egg Boy, I'm sure, has a name, but this is one of the things where, again, it's probably helped his mystery that, in fact, he can be known as Egg Boy and that's his persona. It's almost like the cloak that he wears. The Clark Kent of who Egg Boy is in his everyday life means that he can largely go fly under the radar.
Shall we dig into some of these top 5s?
Sure.
I've chosen top 5s because I have a close affinity with Nick Hornby books, and in particular the book High Fidelity. And when I read that book and then obviously saw the subsequent film with John Cusack, the whole time...
Wasn't John Cusack great? Do you remember a film called Better Off Dead?
Yeah.
Better Off Dead is one of the great classics of the mid to late 80s.
Yep.
It really is just absolutely magnificent. I can still remember quotes from Better Off Dead that I won't bore you with here, but that I think I'll introduce into a number of my contributions in Parliament next year, because it is a jewel of a film, really very underrated. And for anyone out there who does go and watch it off the strength of what I'm saying, prepare to probably be quite underwhelmed. But it really is. It really is just a thing of 80s joy. It's a perfect snapshot of that particular decade. But yes, High Fidelity is another John Cusack classic.
And John Cusack, for a while there, was, I think, he was kind of your go-to indie male lead actor.
Well, you don't want someone too good-looking like your James Spader.
Correct.
There's a whole lot of them really. The swarthy stars of the 80s and 90s, and John Cusack, I think, had a sort of lost, bemused and slightly concerned look to him at all times, no matter what he's doing.
Yeah.
Which to me it's not dissimilar to Rebel Wilson, who I think is always Rebel Wilson, albeit speaking to a different script.
Yeah.
Which means that the persona is just thoroughly embedded in whatever character role they end up playing. So, I think John Cusack captured perhaps he was the first metrosexual. Who knows? There's a story for another day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That takes me back too as well. Metrosexual as well. That was all the rage there for a while, and now that's just basically what blokes do.
Well, I think it's what blokes think they should do.
Right. You don't think that guys are more conscious of their like skincare and the clothes they buy?
I think they might be conscious of it. I don't think they necessarily act on it. And
okay.
I think there's a lot to be said for the authenticity of your garden variety bogan. I'm a big fan of the bogan. Always have been, always will be. I think that there's a lot to be said for having a certain number of shirts and a certain number of, pants that are not chinos. I think the hipster movement's probably overtaken the metrosexual in that it's then about perhaps defining who you are through the products that you consume in a way that blokes haven't perhaps done before. But if you think about the Gillette campaign that came out earlier this year around masculinity and what that looks like to be a force for change, the flack that Gillette copped for not allowing, quote, men to be men, unquote. I mean, that same sort of let kids be kids way that we've heard from certain prime ministers. This is the sort of thing that I think really does speak to the way in which our sense of self is increasingly anchored to products and to the marketing-based world in which we live.
Whatever happened to that? Because Gillette used to be the best the man can get.
Well, it's an interesting slogan, isn't it? You could get better, but you don't deserve it.
No, just...
settle for less.
Yeah.
That should have been Gillette's slogan.
Yeah, settle for less.
Somewhat substandard. See, you've got alliterative there. I mean, I don't know. I've always found it really exasperating that men's razors are significantly cheaper than women's razors.
Are they?
And as far as I'm concerned, the nature of the physics involving a blade removing hair is not different depending on what your chromosomal makeup is.
Yeah, and we don't seem to. I mean,
or if it's pink.
The ads. Do you remember the Late Show sketch about the Gillette? I can't remember what product it was called. The Gillette 10,000, where it's got like 100.
Yes.
100 blades.
So many blades. It was like something from Mad Max.
Yeah. And the blades through till 7 sneak up behind the person as a distraction whilst.
You'll literally be able to see through your cheek if you don't know how to use this properly.
Yeah, and Blade 21's just along for the ride.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was in jest. Nowadays, not that I shave because I've got a beard, but I watch these ads and it's ridiculous the amount of blades that are on male shavers. But that doesn't seem to be the case, correct me if I'm wrong, for... women shavers.
No, well, so I think there are a number of products out there that have multiple blades, but I think that you wouldn't want to, you probably wouldn't want to frighten the little ladies off. And so maybe that's why they have more dainty and delicate handles, and maybe that's why the blades, there aren't 7,000 blades like the creature that comes out of the surface of the planet on Star Wars just before they catch up with Jabba the Hutt. It's one of those situations where...
Oh, the Rancor.
Yes, I beg your pardon, I didn't remember the name, but it's lucky you're here. I reckon there's something that appeals to that primordial desire for blokes to get in and wield a cudgel that in this day and age means that that cudgel is now
designed by NASA.
Very angry-looking NASA. Well, that's right. NASA-designed thing that's aeronautical. I mean, under what circumstance? And you can't speak to this because of the beard, but under what circumstance are you going to need to be able to wield a multi-razor implement on the space station, where in fact it would be better for your OH&S to only have one, or indeed to just grow a beard?
Yep. And it's not like we're all getting timed to do it as quickly as we possibly can as well. It's like the speed thing that they're going for.
Well, yeah, and I think also we've got the current idea of the 5 o'clock shadow as it's still a bit of a designer thing. And so people will get out there, what are those electric razors? They're not even razors, the electric shavers. Yeah. And they just have those whirly heads that go around and give you this slightly stubbly look that looks as though you kind of forgot about yourself for a couple of days. Yeah. And, that you can then dress that up. So there are shades of hipsterdom in everything. But, yeah, it's quite extraordinary, the number of blades out there. And then the straight razor. People are into the straight razor.
Oh,
as in the straight razor that looks like something from Sweeney Todd that could just cut a jugular. It's
what
the
are they called again? Straight razor.
Straight razors, yeah.
Cutthroat.
Cutthroat razor? No, you get a cutthroat shave. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's quite horrific, and it's this courting of danger. And I just think we need to get beyond it, quite frankly. I think everyone should just be taking care of themselves. And, if you need to grow a beard to be safe, then do it.
Tick. Okay. So, yes, top fives.
Yes.
So, top fives. I thought we'd do top fives, and I thought we'd pick a couple of categories. If we don't get through them all, that's okay.
Sure.
But the first one would be top 5 moments that made you, Harriet Shing, proud to be Labor this year. The second category, top 5 what the fuck moments from 2019.
Yeah.
A lot to choose from.
Yeah.
Top 5, well, I won't say the other ones because we may not get to them. Go at this rate, we're already 18 minutes in. So let's stick with those ones. And if we get to the others, which I'd like to, particularly the pop culture one, let's go.
All right.
Top 5 moments that made you proud this year in 2019.
I think top 5 moments that made me proud as a Labor MP this year. The first is the Mental Health Royal Commission, and this is something that has been the subject of enormous public discussion since we announced it as an election commitment last year, to provide the highest level of independent inquiry to a social and community and health and education and productivity issue that costs Victoria in excess of $14 billion a year, that costs the Australian economy in excess of $500 million a day, that costs 720 people their lives in Victoria just last year, is something that's well overdue. And being part of that work as the Parliamentary Secretary for Mental Health has been a hugely important and humbling and jolting experience in the course of the conversations that I've had with specialists and with peak bodies, and most importantly with people who live with and experience mental illness. That's the 1 in 5 of us and the 1 in 2 of us who will experience it at some point in our lives. This is an issue that is as profound as the conversation we started about family violence when we were first elected in 2014. Of course, you'd remember we had a Royal Commission into that as well. This is a process that is about a lot of catharsis, a lot of explanation by people who've told their stories often many, many times before to no avail. And it's about fixing a system that in many instances is either incredibly broken or just doesn't exist at all. And people are falling through the cracks and not getting the acute and subacute care that they need. We see families and carers and workers in the sector and health systems struggling to cope with demand. And so we've seen the first 9 recommendations come out in the interim report of the Royal Commission. There's a lot more to do, and the hearings will continue next year, and further submissions will be taken. But it's a process that has led to unprecedented interest from the public and a preparedness to really tackle the stigma that embeds the way that all of us think about invisible illness. The idea that if someone had a broken leg, we'd never ask them to walk up a flight of stairs, but as soon as someone is suffering from depression or anxiety, their inclination, because of a variety of reasons around stigma, is to try to keep going and to cope and to put on a brave face or a stiff upper lip. Even in our language, even in those sorts of turns of phrase, we see that the idea of vulnerability being a sign of weakness is something that we really need to tackle and to challenge. So that's the top one. In very quick order, though, following up from
Before you do one follow-up question there, I get a sense, I don't know whether I read this or someone had mentioned it to me when I was interstate, but there is a lot of interest from both governments and from people within the industries that are touched by this issue, that are both in Australia and internationally, that are looking at Victoria and the outcomes from this Royal Commission. So this isn't just another Royal Commission that a government does into a particular issue. This is potentially groundbreaking, or going back to that word we were saying before, trailblazing.
Absolutely. We see that the first 9 recommendations include things like residential care facilities that also include family and support networks based on a New Zealand model. We also see that the idea of a research-based centre that brings together the work of systems administrators and people with lived experience through that peer support model, as well as outreach and assistance for additional beds, Aboriginal Victorian assistance in a way that provides tailored care and support, because again, one of the things we see in Indigenous culture is that it's about so much more than mental illness. It's about well-being. It's the idea of well-being and what does it mean to be well. The idea of regional and rural Victorians really needing more assistance in the way in which services are provided, and these are not unique problems. We see that the challenges that are faced by people in accessing care and support, or even talking about the need for it, are experienced around Australia. We've heard comments from Scott Morrison around his desire to bring the suicide rate down to 0, and to expand upon that, there are lots of things I could say, but it also means fundamentally we need resources. The Productivity Commission has done an inquiry that it's released a draft report into that again finds that in productivity terms, billions of dollars being invested into lost productivity, into the challenges that are faced in the system when services aren't adequate, and conversely, the importance of investment. If we invest in a front-end way in good mental health and well-being, in proactive measures and programs that address the challenges that people face, and we know that the vast majority of people who experience and live with mental illness, and often it's a number of mental illnesses, that they are diagnosed and those symptoms manifest well before their 25th birthday. So we need to get onto that very, very early, and so looking at everything from the educational sector, early childhood learning and development, what we're doing in our primary and secondary schools, this is something which I think around the world there are models which are working. We just have to see what we can do to find the best parts of those models to work in with the Victorian system, and also to preserve the things that work really well here in our state as well already, and which also need the resources and the support to continue. And that includes the skilled workforce that we have. Again, there's a big stigma attached with working in mental health, and we have people who are suffering from enormous burnout, who work so hard and invest so much of themselves in the care that they provide, and we can't expect that to continue without needing many more mental health professionals, and that's again a big part of the recommendations. That's
going to be huge and interesting to watch going into 2020. The next one, in terms of your top 5 issues that made you proud to be Labor this year?
Industrial manslaughter
has
passed the Victorian Parliament and has become law. So this is a huge change to the Victorian law. It doesn't, in fact, change the standard that applies in making out an offence. There were a whole lot of concerns by the Coalition and members of the Liberals and Nationals, which is why they voted against it, just as they voted against treaty, just as they've said that they won't implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission into mental health. These challenges are so important because on our grounds and on our work sites and on our factory floors, we're seeing that too many people are still dying, that we see that there are dozens of lives lost every year in Victoria across a range of sectors, most specifically in agriculture, in manufacturing, in mining and construction, and that where there has been a serious criminal negligence, there can now be fines imposed of up to $16.5 million for corporations and jail time for representatives of companies where there has been either a serious criminal negligence or, in fact, a failure to provide the reasonable acquittal of a duty of care, and that includes to members of the public. So if you think about that Grocon wall collapse, which occurred in 2013 or 14, the wall on Swanston Street, and I was just around the corner and heard the wall collapse, and there were people from our office who were lifting bricks that had collapsed onto people, trying desperately to save them. That should never have happened, and that sort of scenario would in fact be covered. It's about people who have control of a site needing to be held responsible in a way that really sends a very strong deterrent message. And we also need to recognise that the importance of this is very much about hoping that it never gets used, hoping that the deterrent effect is something that will save a life, and someone will in fact never be aware of that.
When Daniel Andrews announced it I think it was maybe at a Labor Party conference,
yes.
It was, I myself was like, whoa, this is big. And I immediately, even though as a former union organiser, I think this is long overdue, but I immediately just thought about employers and even the broader general public, how they would have responded to that. How have you found, as someone who holds public office, how has this gone down in the community?
Generally really well. There are a number of people in regional communities who were really scared about the laws. I know that a lot of farming families in particular were very vocal about concerns, as I think the VFF was also vocal about concerns that families would be prosecuted at times of enormous trauma after the loss of a family member in family-run enterprises who had died in an agricultural accident. And agricultural accidents are a very big part of the loss of life in Victorian workplaces. But having said that, there are a number of really tragic accidents that occur, often involving little kids, often involving quad bikes or interactions with machinery. And you see families who are in a state of just insurmountable grief, and the concern was that they would then be up for a prosecution for industrial manslaughter. There are two cases that spring to mind in that scenario, one involving a very little kid of about 3 years old and the other a 12-year-old. In both of those cases, the prosecution exercised a discretion not to prosecute because the families had been ripped apart by the loss of kids from their families. And this is the same situation with this law as well. That prosecutorial discretion does remain. And so it's really important to know that this is about encouraging and with a stick, if required, employers to do the right thing. It would cover scenarios such as the guy at your lawn power station, Graham Edwards, who was a unit controller with 30 years of impeccable service, who happened to have a circuit arc when he was in the process of doing a standard routine changeover. And it turned out that in that situation, all of the equipment that had been being used was, in fact, it was a lucky dip. It was just a question of when this tragic, awful thing was going to happen. And I think there were also problems across other power stations, and it's about preventing those problems rather than reactively addressing them. And I know that in that situation, Energy Australia did a lot of work to do a full safety audit, but this is about making that difference before somebody loses their life at work. No one should lose their life at work. We just have to make sure that we continue to send that very, very clear message, and that we provide the WorkSafe Inspectorate with the right level of resourcing to really get that message out into the community.
Yeah, that resourcing stuff's really important. Even from my experience as a union organiser, the union movement can't always be left to be the cop on the beat, so to speak, in an industrial environment. And so the more resources we can provide to bodies like WorkSafe?
Well, particularly where health and safety reps often aren't allowed to do their job. If you look at the way in which the federal industrial framework is being tightened up at the expense of unions' capacity to represent their members and to access their delegates and the workers who are in their industries and sectors, we see that recently the work of a handful of crossbenchers was the only reason that we didn't see a huge number of additional restrictions on unions who could in fact see people no longer able to do their work, really valuable work in occupational health and safety, if their paperwork was late. You know, it speaks volumes to where the priorities are for this federal government, that's what they're looking at after we've just seen a banking royal commission that's found that there is so much wanting in other sectors where perhaps people in Canberra in government might be inclined to turn a blind eye.
What else have you got on your list there in terms of what's been inspiring in 2019?
Inspiring in the way in which we've worked this year, I think to come back to the grassroots things that make a real difference and a positive difference to people's everyday lives. Not just about infrastructure, it's not just about the record number of level crossings that have been removed and the improved amenity that is happening across all of the parts of the state where that work's been taking place. It's also things like new kinders and new schools and better access to programs. And one of the things that we're seeing just now is the dental vans are rolling out. And the Health Minister, Jenny Mikakos, insists on calling them Dan's vans, and I don't really like Dan's vans, so I'm going to stick with dental van. But
I get PTSD when I hear the word dental van. As soon as that appears,
everyone does.
When you walked onto the schoolyard that morning and there it was, it'd be like, shit.
It's a bit reminiscent of Marathon Man, isn't it? Yeah, that horrific scene where Dustin Hoffman has his teeth addressed in Marathon Man is something that means that I'm not a terribly good dental patient, and I've never been under. In fact, I've never had anaesthetic because I saw that movie starring Kevin Bacon, which was about a group of friends who work out how to bring each other back from the dead. And it'll come to me, but one of the very awful things about that movie is that I decided at a very young age that I could never go under. And so I had all of my wisdom teeth out in the chair. They were impacted. I was like Pumbaa from The Lion King. They were growing in all sorts of funny directions. And rather than go under... Flatliners with Kevin Bacon. What a movie.
1990.
These must have been my formative years. It's following, I mean, you start with John Cusack and it's all downhill from there, but Marathon Man with the dental scene, but also then, Flatliners with Kevin Bacon basically convinced me that there was no way that anaesthetic was ever going to do me any good. So all 4 teeth out in the chair, that's an experience that I will try to forget. But the dental vans... To actually be serious for a moment, these are so important. We know that where we can get good dental hygiene and good gum care for students in primary and secondary school, that it actually has a whole lot of knock-on effects for the rest of their health. We know that poor gum condition and teeth and dental condition is one of the sort of issues that's present in a number of other really significant major issues involving hospitalisation. And we also know that these vans are going to free up about 100,000 extra spots in the public dental system every year. And so it's about a checkup and it's about non-cosmetic treatment. So it's not a way to displace the cost of braces, I'm afraid, for anyone out there who might have been excited about moving to Victoria to save about $15,000. But it is one of those things where it does mean that kids will learn how to take good care of their teeth. They'll be able to get supervision. They'll be able to get the right sort of care during school hours, and that's often really important for parents as well. Other things that have happened in the state include things like 3-year-old kinder. We are smashing that out across the state, and this graduated increase from 10 up to 15 hours of universal 3-year-old kinder is absolutely life-changing. Again, if we can prepare little kids for school and how to socialise and how to form connections and communicate and solve problems and code. And that's right, because I can't. If we can teach them how to program my remote control, it's the sort of thing that develops a whole lot of confidence before they even get started. And from an equity point of view, for those kids who don't find it easy to fit in, who don't necessarily walk into a group of their peers and suddenly make friends, this is the sort of thing that does help to build that confidence, and we just need to keep going with that. And then otherwise we're continuing the work on changes around the voluntary assisted dying legislation having come into effect, the ongoing importance of regional and rural healthcare, the specialist appointments are starting to roll out across the board, and very dear to my heart in the Latrobe Valley and throughout Gippsland, the ongoing investments in educational opportunities through free TAFE are just making a huge difference. I turned the sod a couple of weeks ago for the new Morwell Health and Early Childhood Learning Centre at Morwell, which is part of a $35.5 million upgrade to that campus. And enrolments at that campus alone, since we started free TAFE, have gone up by 153%.
That's huge.
And it is absolutely massive, and it's in all of the right directions. So it's actually encouraging greater participation from women, particularly women who've left the paid workforce to have kids, from people who are transitioning into other work as part of career changes, or having worked in one sector, they want to move to another. There are huge opportunities that are taking place to really target that into the areas where jobs are needed. And when we've partnered with universities to provide things like OT and physio courses, and worked that in with health and allied care and new energy and electro-technology jobs and positions, food and fibre, and allied healthcare and aged care. The options are endless, and again, to see how it all fits together, it is like a jigsaw where we have an announcement like 3-year-old kinder, and then we add early childhood learning and development courses to the free TAFE list. You can see that need for those skills and that expertise will be met because of the way the skills and training system is being accommodated around these policy challenges as the population grows. It's pretty amazing stuff.
It actually is, and the more I travel around the country with work and speak to fellow travellers, whether they have a Labor government or a Conservative government, that jigsaw you speak of, there's bits missing in their economic story, or what they're trying to achieve for their particular state, or even at a national level. Really, the Tories are an absolute, policy-free zone when it comes to this sort of stuff. And you come home to Victoria and go, yeah, see, all this makes sense. And it feels like the Daniel Andrews government since day one, or even before that, even leading up to the 2014 campaign, here is a plan that we have that we want to execute, where we are going to help Victorians across so many facets of our great state. And it just slowly unfolds and does the good work that it's been done. And I think that's fantastic, particularly being biased, coming from Gippsland. I always felt that it's an area that and this is controversial, but I felt like it's the forgotten part of the state sometimes. I know people down there sometimes feel that way, but to see the work that Labor's doing in that part of the state now is really, really heartening.
Yeah.
And I think part of that's down to you, actually. I don't think they're not forgotten, because you're in people's ears constantly saying, oi, this is what we need. I
think I've become increasingly annoying for a lot of people in Melbourne around the asks for that part of the state, and I think that's the job. I mean, it's what I came into this to do. I have never stopped advocating for not just transition but development for the Latrobe Valley in particular, and for Gippsland. And we just released the Latrobe Valley Authority 3-year report last week, and we've seen there've been we've put in $266 million in transition funding, but over the 4 years of our last government, over $1 billion across the region in infrastructure, in programs, in services. We see now that we have an unemployment rate that is 3.7% less than when Hazelwood indicated that it was shutting operation in September 2016. So there's been a lot of change, and it has to continue over time, though. These are jigsaws that are really important to go about in a methodical way. Unfortunately, we still need the Commonwealth Government to come to the table. We've got a federal minister in Darren Chester who has said he'd go into bat for Gippsland, who says he loves Gippsland, and to date the Commonwealth has only put $43 million into transition. To date, we're seeing the feds, they'll pick a fight over one particular issue, which is really, I think the phrase is a dead cat. It just gets whacked on the table at the expense of all of the other issues that require attention. And, the coalition's very much been missing in action on this particular part of the state, but there's a lot to be proud of. I think we need to get out of our own way a bit in terms of being our own worst enemies and the inclination to be parochial, but there are huge things happening. And a tech school, new TAFE campuses, railway upgrades, record investment in road maintenance, resurfacing and upgrades. The school investment has been absolutely unprecedented. A $217 million investment for the Latrobe Regional Hospital, $115 million for Wonthaggi Hospital, new secondary school there, indoor basketball stadiums. We've had $85 million in sporting infrastructure, and a whole lot of people shook their heads and said, oh, well, how are we going to get Hazelwood workers to work as lifeguards at the pool? And that's not really the point. The point is that if you increase livability and you do as much work as possible to give work to local contractors and businesses and employers, and you create pride of place and bring an events calendar to Gippsland. We had the Big Bash League just yesterday. Their Stars and the Hurricanes went head-to-head at the Ted Summerton Reserve in Moe, and we've just built a cricket centre of excellence there. It's modelled on Junction Oval. It's got 5 lanes that can also be adapted to be an indoor cricket area with state-of-the-art technology, and that's sending some really strong messages to the local community, which fundamentally owns this resource. It is a community resource that's also able to be used by the very best cricketers in the world, and that's about attracting events and also giving people a really good sense of pride about why it is that these communities deserve this investment.
You've spoken a bit about the things that have inspired you in 2019. Let's flip the coin and talk about the things that, well, I've called it the top 5 what the fuck moments of 2019. You don't have to go through all 5. I've got a couple to throw out there as well. We can have a bit of a back and forth. But which ones stand out for you this year to go, oh my God, why?
Yeah, I think to touch on the most recent example first, Scott Morrison's response to not just the emerging issue and the urgency of the climate change conversation, but also the recent failure to really articulate a vision around responding to bushfires and frontline emergencies, has tapped into an enormous amount of anger. It is palpable, the anger in communities who feel as though they have been left, not just metaphorically, quite literally left for the shores of Hawaii for a family holiday when some of the biggest fires Australia has ever seen are currently raging across New South Wales, that we've seen hundreds of homes lost, we've seen firefighters losing their lives, we've seen subsoil moisture in our forests in East Gippsland. It's as dry as it has ever been, and yet apparently it's not a good time to talk about climate change policy, and apparently we don't want to be engaging in knee-jerk responses to this issue. Well, it's not really a knee-jerk response when in fact farmers have been in drought in some parts of the country for 8 years, and when in Gippsland we're looking at our 4th failed season, and when we're looking at water reserves that are being drawn down to silt. There's only so much we can do on desalination plants and on renewable energy policies and on changes to energy efficiency in housing and on a state-based response in Victoria when we have a federal government that doesn't have a clear energy policy, that doesn't have any sort of way to articulate the urgency of this discussion on climate change, when the rest of the world looks to Australia and sees that we are constantly failing, not just in relation to our own obligation to act, but also in relation to the global commitment that we need to bring everyone along. And this idea of apportioning responsibility because there are other emitters that do much greater damage than us ignores the reality of what we can and indeed should be doing, particularly when we're looking at buybacks in order to meet our Paris Agreement obligations. It's it's a hugely complex issue as it is, and I think it's been muddled to the great shame of leadership in Australian politics by the coalition in recent times.
And I'll throw one in there. One of my sort of WTF moments of 2019, to add to the complexity of what is already a difficult topic and has been a bit of a fault line in Australian politics, is cast your mind back to, in the lead up to the federal election in May, the Bob Brown's patronising convoy to northern Queensland.
Dear listener, if you could hear my eyes roll just now, you'd know that I just about snapped my optic nerves.
And I just at the time was like, why are you doing that? And what makes me even more angry as time goes by is that when will the hard left of Australian politics realise that attacking Labor, the centre left of Australian politics, is not the way that you are going to fix climate change? I went to a conference in Sydney a couple of weeks ago, which was predominantly comprised of people from sort of left of centre political agencies or just not for profits, and some of the discussions in some of these sessions were very much a lot of focus on Adani and all that kind of stuff, but there wasn't a recognition by many of those people that were speaking to say, oh, we kind of got that wrong. We just assumed that Bill Shorten and Labor was going to win. That's why we went after Labor in that campaign. And when in actual reality, what they should have been doing is actually fitting in with the broader left strategy, which is to beat the Conservatives.
And yet you see that when it came to the CPRS, the carbon pollution reduction scheme was voted against by the Greens. And you see that this idea of perfect being the enemy of good is something which continues to plague politics on large-scale intergenerational issues of change, and that it's all very well and good for people to look back in time and to say, well, ultimately it wasn't probably the smartest move to begin the onslaught against progressive politics in Queensland, where Adani was posited as a really great investment that would deliver jobs and economic certainty in a part of the world that has neither in many instances. But again, we don't seem to learn from our mistakes. And again, here in Victoria, it's always fun to look on the social media commentary and those keyboard warriors who love to get in touch with me. Hello, if you're out there. But it's always really interesting to see that people are so quick to apportion blame where perfect hasn't been the outcome. And in Victoria, we couldn't keep Hazelwood open because it was a private operator, and yet what we did do was establish an Australian first in the Latrobe Valley Authority, an Australian first in the worker transfer scheme, a system of transition and development that is about long-term change, that is about a series of investments with a really long tail on them to create a diversified set of economies and to improve the opportunities that exist for people in the Latrobe Valley in particular. And there are other states around Australia that are looking very keenly to adopt a number of the steps that have been taken by the authority and by the Andrews government to effect transition and change. It's no coincidence that the head of Solar Victoria, that its office is in Morwell, the very location of the mine fire in 2014, when in fact the horizon looked like Mordor. It was absolutely, it was horrific, and you couldn't walk down the main street without having a headache after 50 metres. And we had a premier then, Dennis Napthine, who said that people should open up their holiday houses if they wanted to give people a break from that smoke. And there was no evacuation policy. And when it came to the clean-up, people were given a mop and a bucket and a pamphlet and a pair of rubber gloves. And if that's not symbolic of the lack of engagement on these big issues, then I struggle to find anything more resonant than that. And I think that on the question of what we're doing in Victoria, it's very much been about hard work that's done incrementally and done with discipline, and understanding the nature of transition as we face it is going to be different in every location, but that it's about committing to developing opportunities, to understanding that the world is changing, that try as we might, we're not going to have the same opportunities that existed 50, 60, 70 years ago. Wonthaggi used to have a whaling industry that was a huge reason for that town's economic prosperity. And as we all know, that's not been an industry, at least in Australia, that has continued with any momentum at all. In fact, it's gone. And so,
thanks to Mark Dreyfus.
Thanks to Mark Dreyfus. What was he thinking? But the world changes, and it's inevitable that those changes will occur. We won't find another private investor for a brown coal-fired power station in Victoria. No matter how many people want that to be the case, it's not going to happen. And I was asked in 2015 in a radio debate with Darren Chester whether I could guarantee that there would be no jobs lost if Hazelwood ceased operation. And of course I couldn't. That's a ridiculous proposition. And
nor could he.
Well, no one can. Yeah. I mean, I can't even guarantee what I'm going to eat for dinner. I can't guarantee which way I'll turn when I head out this door, which is unfortunate because one side is a wall. But the other part of it is that we need to actually treat this debate with the discipline that it deserves. There is no point in engaging in fanciful thinking when our options are being steadily cut off, when we're seeing these record spikes in temperature, when we're seeing a lack of appetite within the market for fossil fuel, when we're seeing rapid developments in technology, including in battery storage. These are opportunities for us to seize, and if we don't seize them, then it will be to our economic and to our community and to our social and environmental detriment.
What else this year jumped out at you that's, what the fuck?
Well, okay, just internationally.
Yeah.
So the impeachment.
Yeah.
What a time to be alive. I mean, I think Donald Trump really has rewritten just about every record book around how to have his earlier public comments age about as well as milk. So we've seen his comments around impeachment brought back up, as we've seen everything else brought back up to basically call him to account or to show him up as a hypocrite. But ultimately, none of this seems to matter. And there's this curious idea in politics of some people being almost Teflon in the way in which they are impervious to criticism. They may have the thinnest of skins and they may have glass jaws that twinkle in the sun, but they're still at large completely unworried by being deeply unpopular in the ways that certain social media platforms like Twitter will give a voice to. So that's been an enormous development. Boris's hair,
that alone.
I can't get past it. I know there's been, the Scottish National Party, again, that's another thing that leaps out at me. Nicola Sturgis and the work that has happened in Scotland to basically reinforce Braveheart as a contemporary model for political engagement in Scotland, minus perhaps Mel Gibson. He's probably in there somewhere. Who knows? But Boris's hair, I don't understand it. And in terms of other moments throughout the year, I think probably one of the biggest WTF moments for me is probably the lack of, I think, huge public outpouring of love about the fact that I've bought 2 miniature donkeys.
Very good. I actually was wondering at what point you could work that in.
Yeah, so
that's impressive.
I think there's probably not too many people who haven't heard about this, but for those who are as yet in the dark, it's been a sustained wish of mine. There's a Dylan Thomas work called Under Milkwood, and it was a radio play that he wrote in the 50s, and he was this Welsh alcoholic poet and very troubled individual, but a remarkable genius when it came to wordsmithing. And he was like the Vincent van Gogh of words, if I can put it that way. And he wrote this radio play. And in the radio play, there's this line when he's describing this town, which is called Laregab, which is, when you spell it backwards, is bugger all. That's the kind of wit he was. But he wrote this line, donkeys angelically drowse on Donkey Down. And for some reason, I read that when I was in about, grade 6 or grade 7, and donkeys became my instant favourite animal. I love them. There is nothing that you can't love about a donkey. Their ears, their eyes, their little knock knees, and they're not stubborn. They just don't like to do anything until they're entirely sure that it's the right decision. So they're an animal which I aspire to use as a template for how I go about my own life. So if that means I have to stand motionless at an intersection for many minutes before I decide which direction I'm going to head, then that's okay. But I have, a number of weeks ago, purchased a couple of miniature... Well, one is a micro miniature donkey and one is a miniature donkey.
What is the difference?
About 4 inches. And they'll grow to be about the size of Great Danes. Very fat Great Danes with big pointy ears, and they form these incredibly solid bonds with humans. So I'm basically going to be their person, and they're very loyal. They're incredibly sensitive. They're very easy to train if you are the person for them.
Have you established that you are the person?
I'm
for
the
them?
person for them.
Okay.
Yes. No. I've got this whole set of ideas.
Go on.
You know how every
I'm knocking after this. So I've got nothing else to do today. So if you want to extrapolate on this,
yeah, absolutely. So I aspire to be that person. You know, every town has that person. Everyone's got. You can all think of someone in your town or in your province or in your region who, or even in your street, who goes around. Basically doing the weirdest things possible. And in England, for example, you would think of an aristocrat in a crumbling castle with no money to put the power on but a couple of giraffe wandering around in the gardens. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, like kind of egg in the beard and, very rumply kind of effect, but still has, stuffed pheasants. It's that situation. So I've always wanted donkeys, and miniature donkeys are even better because you can basically just take them anywhere.
Do they fit in the car?
Well, yes. In fact, that's interesting. You should say that. When I first bought my first greyhound, I went up to the greyhound adoption facility with a whippet to see if the whippet would get along with a greyhound, and came back in a Toyota Echo with the whippet and a greyhound in the back of a Toyota Echo, and then the next day traded the car in to get a car that was big enough for both of them to stretch out and be comfortable. The reason... walk with me on this story. Yeah, that's right.
I can imagine you go to the dealership going, so what car are you after, Ms. Shing? Something that both a whippet and a greyhound can stretch out and be comfortable.
Correct. Well, in fact, you can put miniature donkeys into vans. You can put them into like a people mover. That's probably not something... And they face backwards when they travel, which is interesting, unlike horses.
Wow.
Yeah. There are many differences, subtle but important. So I suspect I'll probably end up getting a teeny tiny horse float.
Oh, right.
The world's tiniest horse float, if you will, and that they'll come around with me. And in essence, I think I'm going to end up taking them around to as many places as I can, because I figure that if they bring me this much joy, then everyone else is going to love them too.
You're just spreading a bit of love.
So Samson and Mr. Thomas are coming to...
And Mr. Thomas in
tribute to Dylan Thomas, yes.
Samson?
Samson, because he was a mighty and fearless leader. I don't know.
And then you cut the donkey's hair off?
Yeah, no, but this is where I've been very specific that if there are any farriers or vets called Delilah, they are allowed nowhere near Sam. Their names will be shortened to Sam and Tom. That's just to be, completely honest about it. But you can just walk them around. And I've been asked many times, including by a number of members of Cabinet, what the point is. And the answer is happiness. The point is happiness. And if that means that I have to have a 30-year commitment, they live for decades, to these animals to live their very best and happiest lives, then so be it.
Have you brought them to Parliament?
No, but interestingly, as a lawyer...
A lot of grass out the back there.
I like finding a loophole, and at this stage I have combed through a number of rules and regulations, and nowhere can I find any exclusion of miniature donkeys. There are exclusions on dogs that are not assistance dogs. I did actually have a joke about wanting to sneak the greyhounds into into my office at the back of Parliament, to which I was told that trying to sneak something the size of a panther times 2 into my office was going to be pretty obvious given the level of security detail. But it's one of those things where I think they would make everyone happy. I think that there's no downside to it.
None whatsoever.
What could possibly go wrong? That's radio silence for you out there. Yeah. So it is. It's going to be. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be just the best thing ever. I can't wait. And they're good for dressing up in costumes as well.
I'd imagine, in all seriousness, I think it would be fun to take them to the schools. The kids would love them. Right?
And also, well, not a lot. I'm overstating that here. There aren't thousands of therapy donkeys, but there are a number, particularly in the US, and they go around to schools and to hospitals, aged care facilities. And as you and I have talked about before, one of my babies for policy development was greyhounds in aged care retirement facilities, which is also something we are rolling out. And I think donkeys have the same application. They're very gentle. They're very affectionate. They love human company. And in the way of all animals, they have a non-judgmental air to them that makes them extremely approachable, particularly for people who may be reticent to engage with people.
Can kids ride miniature donkeys?
It depends how big the child is.
Right.
So I think once you get above...
Preps to grade 3.
Yeah, I'd have concerns about it. The last thing I would want is for the donkey to be unhappy. But you can train them to pull tiny little carts.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Right. And it's very left of centre as well. In the United States, the donkey's obviously the emblem for the Democrats.
Well, when I went to Venice, I went there and was recommended to this place to get stationery made. And this man does really centuries-old printing techniques, and was told that I should absolutely get some personal stationery made. And so I went there and selected a picture of a donkey, obviously, and he wanted to put the name directly under the donkey, at which point it looked at the top of the stationery as though I was calling myself a donkey. And then I said, what's the word for donkey in Italian? And he said, asino. So basically I'd be calling myself an ass. And so I had to back away from that plan. But I still do have the donkey on my station.
Asino.
Asino.
Like Arsenio Hall.
What a great movie. Coming to America.
Coming to America 2 is coming out.
I don't think that
Eddie Murphy was on SNL on Saturday night.
You can't do it. You can't. I won't watch it.
I've never watched Anchorman 2 because I just don't think you could do...
Nothing can top Ron Burgundy in the original and the best.
No.
In the same way that I never saw Frozen 1, but Frozen 2. But the Cats movie, have you seen the reviews on that?
Yeah, it's getting absolutely shat on.
It has been absolutely shellacked. So it's just the most... Sometimes a movie gem comes along that gets such a comprehensive drubbing that you go along just so that you can hate watch it after you've read all of these reviews. And the worst part of that is that usually you agree that it's just been a really shit movie halfway through, but you're stuck with your time having been eaten up. And I'd rather just read hilarious reviews about how it's a flaming dumpster of a film that was beyond redemption, and these cats change from the size of grasshoppers to the size of giants without any sense of irony or perspective, and that it has no plot. And
a lot of decent actors have...
Oh, Judi Dench. She was doing her best with that material, wasn't she?
What?
And yet Rebel Wilson is in it, being Rebel Wilson, albeit in cat form. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. A couple more things before we wrap up.
Yes.
Give us your top 5 festive songs of all time. Secular, non-secular.
Do they have to be festive? See, immediately... seized on the one word in this, which for you is probably pretty key. I think we probably have to give props to Mariah Carey for All I Want for Christmas Is You.
Yes.
I think, as I understand it, it's hit number 1 for the first time in Australia this year.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether there's some kind of retro styling that's meant that it's all of a sudden really
it's like
really
a 20-year arc for it to get there.
I hate it in the same way I hate Love Actually, and I know that that's an inflammatory thing to say for many people.
I'm okay.
Can't stand that film.
It's a great tradition in my family, set by my nephews and nieces when they were much younger kids, and they're now in their sort of late 20s and early 30s now. But they've maintained it. Christmas Eve, they all get together and they watch Love Actually. But when they were younger, I was that annoying uncle that would narrate all the inconsistencies throughout, to the point that I got banned. And I know some of them listen to this show and they'll be listening right now going, yes, exactly.
I am also that annoying uncle, except I will do it if I'm alone.
Let's go through it right now. Oh. What are some of the weird things about it?
Okay, children speaking like they're 55. Stop it. And I know it's a peculiarly British thing.
Yeah. Which child are you talking about? There's a couple.
Oh, who's
not the kid that was going to play the drums to impress.
Falls in love. Yeah. I mean, firstly, stop that.
Yeah.
Right. Secondly, Emma Thompson, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Alan Rickman. I mean, really, Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
Stop it.
I mean, he was Eamon de Valera, not anymore.
Thirdly, Hugh Grant. You know what? I had issue with Boris's hair. I take greater umbrage at Hugh Grant as the Prime Minister.
The dancing, or
all of it. It's just awful.
It was a bit of sexual assault in the workplace as well, wasn't it?
Also, if that doesn't breach all sorts of codes,
right?
Ugh.
This was pre-Me Too, though.
Where's the union? I want to know where the union is.
Where was her union?
Basically.
Yeah.
I suspect they probably weren't allowed in. They probably had a rule banning.
He may have been a Tory, though, so she may have been Tory staff.
Interesting. And yet, even Tory staff are entitled to have safe workplaces.
True, but I'm just saying that maybe culturally...
Maybe culturally that's true.
They weren't the union.
Yeah, no, and I every time I start to think about this film, I get myself into a bit of a rage. And my beloved partner knows this, and therefore there is a constant invitation to watch Love Actually.
Does she like it?
She loves it.
Right.
She loves it. And so that's her ambit claim now for anything other than watching Goodfellas. I mean, obviously, if I want to watch Goodfellas or The Untouchables or Scarface or Casino...
Great Christmas movies.
Great Christmas films. I mean, they were going to be the ones that I would bring up. These are the sorts of things that make me happy at this time of the year, and apparently it's all about Alan Rickman being a cheater McCheaterface.
Yeah. Or the guy that fancies Keira Knightley's character.
Oh, stop it. A bit of respect for the relationship. Also, what sized card are you writing on?
Yeah.
Come on, she's not blind.
Like, how did... that in reality, that never happens. No one opens a door and then does the card thing and not get slapped in the face.
Well, I think it's a hark back to, standing on the steps of someone's house in the 80s with a boombox, except you can't because it's British and a boombox would be unseemly and impolite.
Yeah.
And therefore it's important to write in oversized, very wasteful card. It seems like it's quite a decent thickness to that card, like 120 GSM maybe. Yeah. And it's a very large texter. People from 150 metres away could read that, and everyone would just be groaning. It's just awful. It's up there with Bridget Jones for me.
Yeah. That also touches on
British.
Yeah, but that's the guys that did. It's Working Dog. The production house is Working Dog, and they did
Notting Hill.
Yeah.
See, awful. It's just all awful. Yeah. And I think that there's a peculiar space in our pop culture occupied by Hugh Grant that just makes me wince. Just there's a just an inordinately annoying level of awkwardness.
Four weddings.
Ah. Green Card, was that part of it? No, that's just Andy McDowell and Gerard Depardieu. Here's another question. How is it that Gerard Depardieu gets to pash on with Andy McDowell and yet nobody sees Kathy Bates going on with, with, I don't know, who's a hot young man in Hollywood these days? Tell me, son.
I'm not looking at you. I'd say Ryan Gosling.
There you go. Ryan Gosling doesn't get to pash on with Kathy Bates, and yet Gerard Depardieu gets to pash on with Andy McDowell. It's just
Has Kathy Bates passed on with Gerard Depardieu?
Oh, see, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? I don't know.
Because I don't think it's ever happened before.
Didn't he move to Russia?
I think it's the same person.
Oh, that's an interesting call. You heard it here first, folks. Schrodinger's Gerard Depardieu is basically live and well in Russia. Isn't he Russia now?
Is he?
Yeah, I heard that he had moved to Russia for tax evasion purposes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Geez, you really must have fucked up if you ended up in Russia.
Well, unless, of course, you wanted to go there to own a basketball team. The oligarchs, they've got some good ownership issues there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But otherwise, I hate a lot of Christmas movies. I don't like a lot of Christmas music. I like a bit of Bing Crosby. I like the old school.
I've got Bing on my list, the Christmas song.
See? Yeah.
Oh, what about Nat King Cole? He does some good ones.
I like a bit of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. One of the Christmas songs that I've always found incredibly disturbing is I Saw Mummy Kissing Santa Claus.
Yeah, I found that disturbing as a child.
The Christmas tree last night. What a laugh it would have been if Daddy had only seen Mummy kissing Santa Claus last night. I just find that there's an element of disclosure culture in that I'm just deeply uncomfortable with.
What sick fuck wrote that?
Oh, I don't even know. I don't know. Probably the same person who wrote Baby Shark.
What about, what about Last Christmas by Wham?
I do like that. But, again, it says that person is really only prepared to have a one-day relationship.
I thought, this year, To Save Me From Tears, I thought the lyric was, until literally probably about a year ago, I thought it was this year, The Sevi Frontier.
Oh, nice.
Because the film clip was in the snow, and I thought that he was making reference to the ski resort they were in.
That's fantastic.
And I was like, and where is this Sevi Frontier?
Yeah.
I've never heard of this.
That's really cool. I think I probably prefer that. I might sing it that way from now on. But the other thing about the lyric is that last Christmas I gave you my heart, but the very next day you gave it away. Next day, right? So that's one day, right? So this Christmas, so we've had a full 362 years.
The semi-frontier.
Yeah, on the semi-frontier. That's right, on the piste, as it were. This year to save me from tears.
No, you
I can't do it. I'll give it to someone special. So firstly, it's very passive-aggressive. But secondly, it sounds like they're also prepared to go in for a potentially another one-day relationship. That's no way to live.
No. It's short-termism.
Well, it is.
And that's not going to get you anywhere in life.
If you're a mayfly, perhaps. The mayfly that lives for a day.
Yep.
But for the rest of us...
But also remember, this time of the year isn't just for Christians, it's also for the sons and daughters of Abraham. The Hanukkah song by Adam Sandler, I think, is very underrated.
Well, in fact, I was in a shop in Maui the other day, and the Hanukkah song came on, and it was full blast. They had it. Yes, they were playing. They were playing a series of Christmas tunes, and I was waiting to collect a script, and the Hanukkah song came on, and I started to sing along, and then I started to laugh a bit, and then I started to laugh a lot, and then I noticed that people around me were systematically becoming more and more offended, to the point where it was changed. The music was changed. The Hanukkah song was taken off, and I think probably Mariah Carey came on after that.
What?
Yeah. It's pretty fantastic.
They were offended.
No, it wasn't Christmassy enough. Because it's a Hanukkah song.
Well, how did it get on the playlist in the first place?
Well, see, that's the question, isn't it? How did it get on the playlist?
I reckon they've just grabbed some Spotify one and they've not
probably
pre-checked it.
It's a hidden track, maybe,
yeah.
like Alanis Morissette at the end of Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah.
If you could get through that album without thinking that there was no point in ever trying to interact with another human being ever again in your life,
yes.
Then in fact, if you waited out for that CD to run its course, you'd get to this secret track at the end. And wow, if that didn't make you want to go and join a nunnery and live a life of silence, then I don't know what did. But lots of people I knew in the 90s, again, what a time, were just absolutely wedded to that song. It's about busting into a guy's house and going and standing in his shower and sleeping in his bed while he's not home. There's a lot wrong with popular culture and lyrics.
Also, big throwback to the 90s. Loved a hidden track on a CD.
Loved a hidden track. It was like a gift with purchase, wasn't it? Because you used to have to purchase your CDs.
Yeah, it became a thing. If you didn't have a hidden track, you'd be like, oh, no hidden track.
No, what about that one day you didn't bring me flowers? No, you do feel gutted.
Yeah.
But there's also the idea of accessibility of music these days hasn't been enough to convince me to get rid of my entire bookshelf of CDs. I've still got them.
You can't do it.
I can't do it.
Because all the idiots that got rid of their vinyl are now regretting it because that's back. And
that's why I hung on to my mixed tapes from 3LO back in the 80s. Yes, I'm looking forward to the day when they attract some value.
I too have kept all my CDs in the event that somehow CD players come back. I don't know why.
I've got one in my car. One of the good things about doing a lot of driving regionally is that sooner or later you'll hit a black spot because they're a federal government responsibility.
True.
And you'll see that, in fact, that there's no reception and you have to do something to pass the time other than eating, which is something that I have embraced a little bit too enthusiastically, and that's a story for another day around getting rid of that first-term spare tyre. But the great challenge in karaoke is that unless you have a decent backing track, you can't get amongst it. So I've started using my CD player.
Right. Up loud,
really loud,
letting it go
so loudly. And I'll stop if I'm doing really long drives and do a bit of a stretch break and do a few star jumps and run around the car a couple of times because you got to be able to still feel your legs. And I'll be watched by sheep or wombats or sometimes an owl. Owls have an interesting way of looking. Quite judgmental when you're doing that sort of thing at 1 o'clock in the morning on the side of a back road.
Unlike your donkeys.
Home.
The last couple of songs I'm going to throw at you. Fairy Tale in New York by the Pogues.
Yes, love it.
Controversial though because of some of the lyrics.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think things have their time. And I think there's an idea of anachronism to many lyrics that mean that they don't stand the test of time in the way that perhaps they were intended when they were written.
Mm.
I think there are lots of examples of that. I still love it. In the same way that I'm trying to love Picasso's art, even though he was just, to my mind, a pretty awful, ordinary person when it came to the way he treated women.
Mm.
That kind of exercise.
Particularly, I read an article, Shane McGowan said that when he wrote those lyrics, and the ones I'm making reference to is, I have to remember, because it was a back and forth between him and Kristen McCall, you're an old slut on junk. Who said that? Did he say that or did she say that?
I think he said that.
And then she says, you're basically you're a lousy, you're a maggot, you're a maggot, you're a cheap lousy. Can you say that word? I don't know. Rather not. Double GOT. He said that he wrote that because they are not particularly nice people, and that they are going through a pretty kind of shit period in their life. It's trying to say this isn't a glossy New York carol.
No, absolutely. But the other thing about those words is that they've also been reclaimed, and so you think about the way in which slut shaming as a movement has actually repurposed that insult and has made it the ownership of women to determine how they are and what they do with their bodies, and the autonomy of that self-determination being really, really important to make it all, Debbie Downer for a moment. But the other part of that insult, as it relates to queer culture, is that again this is something that has been reclaimed. It can be said in hatred, like I've copped the most ridiculous levels of homophobic abuse since I got elected, as much as anything over the marriage equality postal survey and the Safe Schools program, and a whole lot of work being done on conversion therapy bans and the Pride Centre, and I think that words have a time and a place, but a lot of what the LGBTIQ movement in particular has done has been to reclaim those words. I think that's an incredibly important thing around writing your own narrative, and that if you can have that level of ownership, then in fact there is the capacity to exercise control over the way in which other people talk about you and the way that you talk about yourself. And having said that, is it still okay? I mean, less so in Australia. We don't tend to have that kind of, when you're in the UK and you're listening to BBC
which one's the FM one? BBC One, BBC Five, can't remember.
I couldn't tell you. I'm still really angry about Love Actually. So anything. And Boris's hair.
With the few times I've been back in Scotland over the Christmas period, it's amazing. Literally every third song is a Christmas carol, whereas in Australia we don't tend to do that much. Although it's starting to happen a little bit more, but you do hear, Fairy Tale in New York a lot. And the BBC have constantly debated internally about what to do with those lines. Do we them out, or do we just don't play them? Yeah. So where do you think the BBC needs to stand on that? Given that yes, people are reclaiming these words back, but is it still okay for the BBC to play those songs unedited?
Well, I actually think that there are many more problems with language in particular. To come full circle on one of the points I raised earlier around the mental health question and the question of stigma. At the moment, we've just recently had in our top 30 in Australia a song about a woman being a little bit psycho. We have songs about about being crazy, about being unhinged, about being mental, and yet these aren't seen as so problematic that they shouldn't be run on radio stations. I think that when you are looking at sore points and points of tension, often they go back many generations in a vocal way in very specific examples, but there are these huge uncharted dark spots where people are quite happy to let just about anything through to the keeper if it speaks to bias or stigma or prejudice that has gone unconfronted. So to give a really long answer, I think that we can and indeed should play that music. I think Fairy Tale in New York is I actually think it's a really great song. And I think that part of it is speaking to the venom and to the grief and to the rage of the two singers or the two characters. Last song,
the only one that's on my list that's an Australian song, How to Make Gravy.
Well, we just had Australian Gravy Day yesterday.
Correct.
Yes. I've got to admit I did not get the Gravox out, but I know several people who did, and who gave it their all. No, was it Saturday, in fact? Today's the 23rd.
21st.
Yeah. So Saturday was Australian Gravy Day. I've tried really hard to like that song in the same way that everyone else does, and it's never quite stuck with me in the same way.
Why do you think that is? Do you like Paul Kelly?
Yeah, I do like Paul Kelly. I like Paul Kelly more as a poet, I think, than as a musician. I don't know. It's one of the. I think it's just horses for courses. There are some songs that. One song that I love and play a lot at Christmas time is Lou Reed's "Perfect Day." Love it. I love it. And it's the same thing of taste in the way that it goes the other way too. Some songs just won't make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and give you goosebumps and make you smile or make you laugh or make you feel comforted if you're in sorrow. Some songs will.
I saw a meme the other day that said Australians sick and tired of being mentioned that we're a nation of convicts. Then the second part of the meme was Australians' favourite Christmas songs about a guy in prison writing to his family.
I think convict culture is one thing. I think I'm pretty tired of that too. I'd quite like to hear a bit more about treaty, in fact. But yeah, we're getting there.
We are getting there, and we're now there with this podcast. We are done.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for coming on today to wrap up 2019.
It's such a pleasure. There's so many things to talk about, but we should never forget that some of the best conversations can be had without words and with animals instead. So with that in mind, I'd like to extend you a very, very Merry Christmas and a happy and safe New Year, but also an ongoing invitation to spend time with and understand the souls of the two donkeys once they come to live with me next year.
Tom and Sam.
There we go. Well remembered.
That's amazing.
You would have forfeited those rights had you not remembered their name.
I do not doubt that.
Yeah.